It's been drizzling all morning, and the rain just picked up. But I was taking a look at the Weather Channel, and it's saying that the rain is supposed to pass here in about 25 minutes. And so I'm just gonna wait a minute, and once the rain is gone, I'm gonna get out there and I'm gonna give the cattle some feed, and then I'll call it and then I gotta go to work. And so, okay, this whole thing about the cattle business, when I take a look at my numbers, I figured this is something that I would talk about today in more detail. But when I take a look at my numbers, and when I take a look at what I'm doing, so, make sure to just pay attention to the details, all right? Like when I talk about something, I'm bringing home 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animals. I'm taking a 10% deduction off the feeder cattle market. I'm cutting that number in half. I'm sourcing my animals from local sale barns and bringing them in. And then I put them on a 65-70% TDN feed. The feed that I have them on right now is a free choice roughage material. Then right now I'm mixing them a 1-to-1 mixture of distiller grains and corn. And so I got maybe 40, I got 45 animals or so out there this morning. I got 45 animals or so out there. The average weight of my herd is probably about 450 to 500 pounds. I'm giving them 2 buckets of corn, 2 buckets of distiller grains. I'm keeping an eye on their manure twice a day. Make sure to just pay attention to the details, okay? There's a reason why, and I've already talked about this too, but I'm not the only person that does this. Like, I didn't wake up one day and just say, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm just gonna go on a magical cattle adventure. Like, I did not do that. I mean, you gotta understand these things. The reason that I do things the way that I do was because I watched other successful people, then saw what they did. I took a look at these feed yards. I took a look at these big old feed yards. Where, how do they get their feed, right? I just listened to presentations done by feed yards. I listened to presentations done by veterinarians. I listened to presentations done by beef cattle identification specialists. I listened to presentations done by animal nutritionists. I listened to presentations done by crop specialists. Right? I listened to presentations done by these people. I listened to what they were saying. I said this kind of does make sense to a large degree. It does make sense. I'm going to implement it into my life. Then I implement it into my life in a way that works for me. Some people, they might do better. If they feed their animals 60% of their diet in corn. Some places they might see an animal. They might have a 450-pound animal, 350-pound animal. They might do better feeding their animals 50% concentrate. Me personally, I like to go closer to that 40 to 30% concentrate. That's just what I found works for me, right? I mean, just got to take a look at it. Got to figure out how to gauge your, gauge these different things. It's also why I say things like, if you want to see what's going through your animal right now, take a look at their poop, right? I've talked about this like 20,000 times. If you want to see what's going through your animal, if you want to see how their digestion is going, take a look at their poop, right? Take a good hard look at their poop. Make sure they're not, pooping up straight clumps. Make sure they're not pooping up just straight liquid gas. Just make sure that they're that's how you do, that's how you check what's going through your animal as of right this moment. And when it comes to the business side of things, I would say that on a reasonable estimate, when I personally do all these things, I'm giving you the best information that I can. I'm giving you the most correct information that I have collected. Like when I talk about my business, what I'm essentially talking about is that when I raise 150 calves a year, when I raise 150 calves a year, I make about $50,000-$60,000 a year. That's essentially what I'm saying, right? So I was actually thinking about this, but some months there are 3 Mondays on a month. Sometimes there's 2 Mondays on a month, and a very realistic way for me to make $52,000 a year. For me to make $52,000 a year, if I bring home $2,000 cash every single time that I go to the sale barn. Let's say I go to the sale barn and I sell $5,400 worth. Let's say I go and I sell $5,500 worth of animals, and I bring home new animals, and the new animals cost me $2,400. So that leaves me with however much $2,800. That leaves me with about let's say the new animals cost me $2,500. So that leaves me with $3,000. And let's say I'm going to go to the sale barn twice that month, and the average expense for my month is about $1,000, right? It's about $1,000. Then I've brought home about $2,000 cash, and I've also brought home new animals. I've also brought home replacement animals. And so in this scenario, so I figured that the easiest way for me to keep track of how much money am I making a year is to take a look at how many weeks are in a year. That's the easiest way to do it. That's the most simplistic way for me to keep track of how much money am I making. So if I go to the sale barn every 2 weeks, and there's 52 weeks in a year, then I'm going to the sale barn 26 times a year. And if I go to the sale barn 26 times in 1 year, and I bring home $2,000 cash every time I go to the sale barn, then I'm bringing home $52,000 a year. So that's the most simplistic way that I can. It's essentially every time that I go to the sale barn, I need to be coming home with $2,000 cash. And right now, I know that when you look at my numbers, that my numbers look kind of ridiculous. Like, it's like, oh my God, I just brought home, I think last week I brought home about, $4,000 cash. And then the week before that, I brought home another $4,000 cash. And it's like right now my numbers look ridiculous because I'm actually negative 4 animals. Like if I took my $8,000 and then I thought about, hey, I had 2 animals die, and one time I went to the sale barn and I sold 4 animals, but I only came home with 2 animals. If you think about that, I'm negative 4 animals. I need to bring home 4 more animals for me to be break even on my herd. And so if you really think about it, I brought home $8,000 cash, but realistically I need to deduct about $3,000 from that $8,000. And so realistically I'm sitting on about $5,000. And then if you really think about it, I got expenses here and there. Take another $1,000 out of that, and realistically, I'm sitting at about my $4,000 target. I'm sitting at about my $2,000 per cattle check target. Realistically, I'm on track right now. It just looks like I have a massive amount of money because I am negative 4 animals. Essentially, that's why I needed to bring home 4 more animals. If I had brought home 4 more animals and then I deducted my other expenses, realistically, I would be sitting on about my $2,000 target. So right now, I brought home substantially more cash. And if I bring home $2,000 every time I go to the sale barn, if I bring home about $2,500 cash, because I'm gonna have, if I go to the sale barn 26 times in a year, then I'm essentially whatever, right? I'm sitting on about what is it? I'm sitting on about $52,000 a year. So, right now it looks like I'm making a drastic amount of money, but realistically I'm sitting on about my average goal. My average goal, I would say, is to bring home about $2,500 a month. And if I take $500 out of that $2,500 for expenses, for just expenses here and there, realistically, I need to bring home about $2,750 cash every single month. And then I take $750 out of my check every single month, or every twice a month, 26 times a year, or whatever. Then that covers my other expenses, like the vet and things like that, right? And so realistically, right now, I would say that I'm actually sitting right about where my anticipated goal is. I was saying that I said that in a reality situation, as long as I'm making over $3,000 a month, I'm doing well for myself. Because if I'm making over $3,000 a month, I can float the debt service for my new field, and I can also pay for all of my expenses. And here's the thing about, and I've already talked about this too, but in terms of cattle feed, when I put money into cattle feed, when I'm running my numbers on my cattle feed, if I realize that I'm in a situation that I can actually make a positive return on the cattle feed, then I don't see it as an expense. And it's the same thing with the cattle. If my cattle are alive and they're gaining properly and I don't really have any problems with them, I don't really have any issues with the cattle, then I don't really see them as an expense. And I've talked about this before, but like my cattle, it's like if I have an animal and I realize that it's gonna cost me $1,000 for me to make $1,400 on the animal. Like, let's say I run the numbers, I take a look at my past data, I just take a look at what's going on, and I just give my animals a rough appraisal. I just give them a rough estimate. And I take a look at my animals, and I say, well, it's gonna cost me about $1,000 for me to buy an animal, and for me to raise them to a point that I make $1,400 on them. It's gonna cost me $1,000. I don't see that $1,000 as an expense. The $1,000 at the end of the day is negligible, and I've actually talked about this repeatedly in the past. But if you're in a situation like I've legitimately shown you, I've 100% shown you that it is 100% possible for you to make about $50,000-$60,000 a year if you run about 150 calves a year. Granted that you actually do what I'm doing. Like, I've already shown you that it's possible, right? I've 100% shown you that it's possible. You can no longer say that it's impossible. Yes, it is very possible for you to make money in the cattle business. It's very possible. I've shown it to you, right? Legitimately, if you run 150 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animals, and you're in Central Texas, and you take a 10% deduction off the feeder cattle market and cut that number in half, you take that number to the sale barn, you buy 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animals for that amount of money. You would feed the animals a 65 to 70% TDN, 12 to 14% protein diet. When you do these things, and if you feed the animal that diet, then, yes, it is very possible for you to make money in the cattle business. Right? I've already shown you that it's possible. I've already shown you that it's more than possible. Yes, you can make money in the cattle business. Right? Granted that you do things, to a certain degree that you're actually going to make money. If you go on a La La Land adventure, you're going to lose all your money. Like I'm just going to say it, most people lose all their money. Either they're barely making enough to get by, or they lose all their money. Most people do. You got to consider, when you look at the world, you have to actually consider it for what it is, right? If we were going to be in a situation where everybody made it, where everybody got to live, everybody got to financially succeed, that, realistically, you would also have to be in a situation where everybody was going to make good choices financially. You cannot be in the world would not be a better place if we started encouraging people to make bad choices. Like, if you got somebody who is legitimately spending every dollar that they have, they're not investing anything. They're not investing into anything. They're just spending every dollar that they have. Right? And that's why they end up in a situation where they have no retirement. Then we should not be rewarding these people. We should not, right? I mean, let's just be honest. If you got somebody who's who's spending all their money on drugs, and they're spending all of their money on drinking, then we should not be rewarding these people, because what's realistically going to happen if you give these people money, right? I mean, think about it. They're going to go and they're going to spend everything. I mean, just be honest with yourself. If you got somebody who's spending every dollar that they have, and they magically find a way, we just hand them a $2,000 check every month, $24,000 a year, they're just going to get worse. I mean, think about it for a second, right? If you got somebody who's legitimately just a massive pile of problems, and you give them more, and you just give them more reasons to be a problem, they're just going to be a bigger problem, right? I mean, think about it. If you have somebody who's legitimately in a situation where they're going, oh my God, $1,000 a month, I can't run a business because I don't have $1,000. If you give them $1,000, it's not going to solve their problem. I mean, they got a massive character flaw, right? I mean, they're kind of a pathetic individual to begin with. If you give them money, it's not going to solve their problem. Like, when you take a look at my business, I mean, realistically, what do I spend? What do I spend a month? Like $1,000? Is that how much? Realistically, my business costs about $1,000 a month. All of this right here costs about $1,000 a month. Everything. In terms of expenses, I need to go and give the money to the vet. I need to, whatever. It costs about $1,000 a month. And for that $1,000 a month, granted that my animals do not die. I've already talked about this too. But in the cattle business, the only time that I really ever lose money on an animal is if the animal dies. I've talked about this repeatedly in the past, right? If I have an animal, granted that I picked the animal knowledge, I went to the sale barn and I bought a 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animal for a reasonable price. I took a 10% deduction on the feeder cattle market, and then I cut that number in half, went to the sale barn and bought a 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animal for that money. The only time that I will ever really lose money on an animal is if they die. That's it. Other than that, I'm not spending money on any of these animals. I'm making money. Realistically, I put about $1,000 into each one of these animals, and I'll make about $1,400 back. So you got to think about it for what it is. If you're in a situation where you have genuinely convinced yourself the rain is picking up, but from what I was watching on the Weather Channel, the weather's going to pick up for about 10 minutes and then the rain's going to pass by. And so this was what I was waiting for. I was waiting for the rain to pick up, and then once the rain will pass by here in about 10 minutes. But if you're genuinely in a situation where you have convinced yourself that because you don't have $1,000 that you can't run a business, you don't have $1,000 so you can't run this business, you're a massive pile of problems. You are. I mean, you need to really think about it and think about what you're saying. Can you even do the work? I mean, think about it. If I genuinely, and I've already shown you that it's possible, right? I've already shown you that it's possible. Let's say that right now, let's say it cost me $1,500 a month. It cost me $1,500 a month to run this business. If I just flat out gave you $1,500 a month, would you even run cattle? You probably wouldn't. And you got to think about it. Can you even do the work? Like, are you sure that you can even do the work? Most of the time, the money's not the problem. You're going to hear me say this all the time. The money's not the problem. When you end up with somebody who's already having a massive amount of problems, money's not going to fix anything. If anything, the money's going to make it worse. You gotta take a look at the world for what it is. I mean, if you're a naive moron forever, you're not gonna get anywhere. You know, you're just not. And realistically, like in a situation right now where I got this kind of grass, I could probably make myself an extra $1,000 a month. You know, right now, realistically, I'm probably making myself about $4,000 or $5,000 a month. And so, you gotta really think about it. If you're in a situation where you have genuinely convinced yourself that the money is the problem, I'm telling you that the money is not the problem. You are the problem. You are a massive pile of problems. If I even gave you $1,500 a month, you would not magically start running cattle. And I've already shown you in great detail, I've legitimately shown you in very, very thorough detail that if you run 150 calves a year, you can make yourself about $5,000 a month. You can make yourself about $4,000 a month. You can. The only thing that, you know, but at the end of the day, the money's not going to stop you. The $1,500 a month that it costs you to run the business is not going to stop you. And when you take a look at my business, I've already said this like 20 times. Like, you know, I've been in the cattle business for over probably just about 2 years, right? And everything that you see in terms of the cattle, everything that in terms of like me building my herd and all of that, all of the money that I needed to do this came from the cattle business itself. I've told you this 50,000 times, right? Like if I'm averaging $10,500 a month, then I reinvest my earnings. Like right now, in a situation like right now, I'm actually planning to go 100% leverage for my cattle. I'm going to stop investing cash into my cattle. I'm going to go 100% leverage into my cattle. I'm planning to do so. The $4,000, $5,000 a month that I make of net profit, that is the money that is going to build my herd. And so, you know, like genuinely, if any, like let's say there are 1,000, 500 of you, whatever, 500 of you watching my video, and 50 of you want to be a cattleman, I've legitimately told you 100% correct information that you can go to the bank right now and take a loan for 10 grand. And it would cost you about $100 a month. I've told you that. And I've shown it to you. I'm telling you that that is what I do myself, right? And, you know, you can go to the bank right now and buy and take a loan for 10 grand and it would cost you about $100 a month. If you take that 10 grand loan that you get and you plant 10 acres of grass and you bring home, let's say you bring home 10 animals and you plant 10 acres of grass and you just legitimately copy and paste what I'm doing, you will legitimately turn your $100 a month. Let's say you go and bring home 10 animals. You pay $7,500 for the animals. By the time you're done with them, you know, they're worth about 14 grand. It's like, you know, here, very realistic situation. By the time you're done with them, you've turned your $100 a month investment into about $4,000 of net positive income. And it took you like what, 6 months? You take your 4 grand and you do it again. And it's like, you know, you've legitimately just made yourself like an extra $750 a month on a $100 a month investment. And let's say on the second year, you leverage your 10 grand, right? Let's say you do the same thing, but you invest your, let's say you do the same thing, but this time you take a loan for 20 grand and you pay $200 a month and you bring home 20 cattle, right? And you use your $4,000 of net profit to pay for your business. And it's like, you just legitimately turned $100 a month into $12,000 a year. And by the second year, when you go and you do that, it's like you could turn your 12,000. That now you're in a situation where you could leverage your 12 grand for 30 grand, and you go and you invest your 30 grand, and it's like, congratulations, you just made 50 grand. You just made 40 grand. You realistically, you just made $50,000 and you got 6 months to go. I mean, congratulations. By your second year, by year number 2, you're making like $50,000 a year. You're doing exactly what I'm doing. It's not rocket science. And I've already shown you that you can do it, right? I've already shown you exactly how to do it. If you run about 150 calves a year, you can make yourself about $50,000, $60,000 a year. I've already shown it to you, right? And so, I mean, I've already shown it to you. If you run about 150 calves a year, you'll make about $50,000, $60,000 a year. That's about the number. That's about what the numbers look like. And so, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the amount of food that an animal will eat. I wanted to say this very fast. If you take the numbers that I'm giving you, and let's say you take 3.25% of their body weight a day in dry matter, I can almost guarantee, let's say your feed is 10% moisture. Let's say you have a feed that is 10% moisture, and you got an animal that's 500 pounds. And so you're having to feed that animal about 3.7% of their body weight a day in food. So essentially you're feeding that 500 pound animal about 17 and a half pounds of food a day, let's just say, right? And I can almost guarantee that if you feed a 500 pound animal 17 and a half pounds of food a day, if you just take that rough estimate, and let's say you're gonna feed 1/3 of that animal's diet, you're gonna feed 1/3 of that animal's diet a day in feed, and you just copy and paste what I'm doing. You give them free choice hay, and then you give them 1/3 of their feed in concentrate. You give them six pounds of feed a day in concentrate, and you use a Distiller Grains corn mixture. You just legitimately copy and paste the answer that I'm giving you. You just legitimately copy and paste it, word for word. You don't have to go and figure out anything. You just copy and paste it. I can almost guarantee that your animals are to some degree going to put on weight properly. I can almost guarantee it. If you give them free choice hay, and then you give them 6 pounds of grain a day, 7 pounds of grain a day, roughly 1/3 of their diet, you just legitimately copy and paste what I'm doing to a fine detail. You don't have to go and figure out anything. I can almost guarantee that your animals are going to do about just fine. It will start you off on the right foot. It will start you off on the right foot, and then you can figure it out as you go. Keep an eye on your animals. Make sure they're not having a massive amount of diarrhea. Keep an eye on your animals. Make sure that they're not pooping out clumped up balls, right? If your animals are under 350 pounds, be very careful about feeding your animals, right? Be very careful. I use a preconditioner pellet from Purina, but if you're going to put them on a total mixed ration, be very careful about what you feed your animals. But once they're about 500 pounds, make sure you actually pay attention to the details, right? I'm not saying that you should take a 350 pound animal and feed them 1/3 of their diet in grain. I'm not saying that. I'm saying specifically a 500 pound animal. If you have a 500-pound animal and you give them free choice hay, and you rough estimate that you want to give them, you just want to copy and paste what I'm doing, and you want to give them a third of their diet in grain, and you anticipate that you have a 10% moisture content in your feed, so roughly you're going to be feeding 5 to 7 pounds of grain a day, and you're going to use the grain mixture that I'm using. You're going to use a 1-to-1 corn distiller grains by volume mixture of grain, distiller grains, and corn. And you're going to feed that to your animal, and you're going to give them roughly 1/3 of their anticipated diet in this feed, and you put them on free choice hay. I can almost guarantee that your animals are going to start off on the right foot. When you're in these conditions, if you have a 500-pound animal, 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame, and under these circumstances, you will be off on the right foot. I can almost guarantee it. You put them on free choice hay. You feed them about 1/3 of their diet in grain. You use a 1-to-1 mixture of distiller grains and corn. And then, I can almost guarantee that you'll be off on the right foot. At least you'll start off on the right foot, and then you can keep a track of your animals and make sure that your animals are doing okay as you go. If they got massive amounts of diarrhea, then reduce the amount of grain you're giving them. If they're pooping up massive clumps, then feed them more grain. If they're pooping out rock hard clumps, then feed them more grain. It's that simple, right? It's that simple. But you got to make sure that you actually listen and pay attention to the details. I'm not saying that you should go and feed this diet to every single animal. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if your plan is to raise an animal from 500 pounds up to 800 pounds, then this is a realistic plan for you to do. If you have animals that are under 350 pounds, if they're under 500 pounds, you should be considering a different plan. I've said this repeatedly, right? Make sure you're actually paying attention to the details. If you have an animal that's under 500 pounds, especially if they're under 350 pounds, then you should be doing something else, right? I'm saying for a 500-pound animal up to 800 pounds, this is something that you can do. And when you're penciling out the numbers, and when you're looking for feed, I'm telling you that you can utilize a 65 to 70% energy diet, 12 to 14% protein. All right, these are objectively accurate numbers. You don't have to go out and this will start you off on the right foot. Use a 12 to 14% protein diet, a 65 to 70% energy, and then anticipate that your animals will eat 3.25% of their body weight in dry matter a day. And you can run your numbers. I can almost guarantee that this will start you off on the right foot. I would be willing to bet. And if you think about what I'm saying, if you have a 500-pound animal, what I'm saying is that animal is roughly going to eat about 20 pounds of food a day. 15 to 25, about 17 and a half pounds of food a day. That's what I'm saying, right? And realistically, that's about correct. Just sit there and think about it for a minute. So if you want to see how much food you're going to have to give your animals, if you want to see if you can even make money on your herd, if you want to start off on the right foot, here you go. I'm giving you the answers, right? I'm giving you the answers. And if you run about 150 calves a year, you will make about $50,000, $60,000 a year. But that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.